Please pay attention to this one. Tomorrow, acting U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, will meet with lawmakers. It is arguably the highlight of more than half a dozen impeachment-related interviews this week. But one name not on that list, Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer. This man has become central to the investigation, with multiple lawmakers calling for him to testify about his role in trying to convince Ukraine to get dirt on Joe Biden and his family. But a new NBC News investigation reveals that Giuliani's questionable business dealings extend far beyond Ukraine. It is all part of this confusing fence he straddles, part as a private citizen and security consultant, and part as the president's attorney and his handpicked representative overseas. Take a look at this. Before and during the Trump presidency, Giuliani has dealt with officials and clients from Ukraine, Qatar, Turkey, Argentina, Romania, Peru, Chile, and Iran. And it is not always clear if he's there on behalf of himself or the President of the United States. Joining me now to weigh in, former U.S. Attorney and professor at the University of Alabama School of Law, Joyce Vance. Joyce, to the average person out there, explain why this is so concerning.
It's deeply concerning, Stephanie, even though at first blush it may not look that way, because it goes to the very heart of how our government conducts the nation's business. We expect that our foreign policy should be serving the best interests of the American people. Here we see how when you have rogue actors, people who aren't folks who are officially employed by state, people who haven't taken an oath of office, people who aren't cabined by ethics laws that other employees have to conform with, we see how it's possible for a president to use foreign policy to perpetuate his own personal interests, to seek assistance in a foreign election, rather than serving the interests of the country. So that's what's at stake here.
Until now, we've heard from a number of people who testified that the president was directing them to work with Rudy Giuliani. The New York Times is now reporting that the Justice Department is distancing themselves from Giuliani. How significant is that?
It's very difficult to know what to make of this. When you just look at the raw facts, it takes some untangling to try to figure out whether the president is deliberately using Giuliani or whether Giuliani has come to him with a series of deals. But as you say, we know that at least as far as Ukraine goes, the president gave orders that people had to go through Giuliani before decisions could be made about important steps like an American president meeting with a new Ukrainian president. So that speaks for itself. This issue with DOJ, I think, is developing fast. We do know that the Southern District of New York briefed the new Attorney General Barr, on its investigation into the two gentlemen connected to Giuliani, who are now under indictment. We don't know the specifics of those briefings or how detailed they were, but yesterday we learned that the head of the criminal division said that he would not have taken meetings with Giuliani had he been in the loop on that investigation, apparently leaving us to believe that the criminal division doesn't know what's going on in the Southern District of New York and doesn't know what the Attorney General knows.
Well, that just means there's more questions. The question is, who and when will we get answers?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.